Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Howard Klein. I've been an attorney. I have to look at my notes to say that I've been an attorney for over 30 years. Actually, it's been 43 years, but I've been told not to let everybody know how old I am. But I really started as a lawyer very young. And besides, everybody looking at me can tell that I'm not 25 years old. I've been handling general business matters. I've been in-house counsel on a number of occasions, a director of real estate, and most of my focus has been on commercial real estate, landlord-tenant matters, evictions, and rent collections, as well as lease negotiations. I'd like to thank the Retail Brokers Network, who has requested that I conduct this webinar at the RBN's special instance and request. This webinar, as a live webinar, is only accessible to members of our RBN. If you participate in this at all, just be aware that your questions, and if you're at some point able to join in, it will be published for the public at large on May 1st, unless RBN asks me or permits me to publish it sooner. So you will be live on for everybody else. Let's talk a little bit about what we are going to be discussing here. The questions that we are going to attempt to answer is, how will the pandemic affect the future of retail negotiations? How will lease clauses and negotiations change? How will the coronavirus affect investment sales? What are landlords doing to protect themselves from rent loss? Good question. And what are tenants doing to survive? That's even a better question, because that directly affects how well landlords will survive. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Tom Bruce, the current president of the Retail Brokers Network. Tom, take it away.
Thanks, Howard. I appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to do this. We appreciate any platform that we can take RBN and expand upon. Also, I want to thank Beth Patterson. This has taken the place of our Midwest conference call. She did a great job in setting this up to give us a little bit more variety in what we typically do for those conference calls. As most of you know, the RBN is made up of approximately 65 offices across the United States. We have about 700 members, and lately we over the last week or so, we've been having a lot more conference calls, and the participation has been tremendous. And Howard said that based upon who's registered, we're going to have about 25% of the entire membership is going to be on this webinar today. So it's a great platform, and I want to thank everyone for all their participation in RBN.
Great. Tom, thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this. I forgot to mention, if any of you are familiar, I have been publishing CRE radio and TV for almost 10 years now. So I have been doing online streaming, first originally in an audio format, then video, and now I currently do some live streaming. So if anybody has any questions at a later time about how I do this, feel free to ask me. Now, let me introduce the other panelists. By the way, I just saw that there are 72 people now attending this live. I'd like to first start with Beth Patterson. Beth is the principal and director of retail services for Resource Commercial Real Estate. Beth specializes in retail project leasing, development, and land sale services for developers and landowners, as well as site selection for end users. I'd also like to, Tom, I should introduce you also. Tom Bruss is the principal retail brokerage of Founders 3 Real Estate Services. He's also the president of RBN. Tom is one of the original founders of Founders 3 Commercial Real Estate Services. He has extensive experience with prominent national retail tenants, and on the landlord side represents many national and regional owners and developers by marketing their various properties regionally. Let me stop a second. Beth, how do people get a hold of you?
All right. Beth.Patterson@rcre.com, Indianapolis.
Great. And Tom, how do people get a hold of you?
Sure, you can certainly go to our website at founders3.com, or you can go to tbruss@founders3.com is my email address.
Great. Now let me introduce Keith Lord, who's the president and managing broker of the Lord Companies. Since 1986, Keith, you're almost as old as me, by about 10 or 15 years maybe. Keith Lord has served as president and general partner of the Lord Companies. Clients range from developers, Fortune 500 corporations, banks, law firms, private individuals, and the city of Chicago. How do people get a hold of you?
Easiest way to reach us is thelordcompanies.com for the corporate website. Easiest way to reach me is keith@lord.com.
Keith Sturm now is the principal and CEO of Upland Real Estate Group. I'm going to do this like they used to do in the radios. See, if you saw the paper, well, that's a long story. With over 30 years of experience in commercial real estate, Keith Sturm is the principal and CEO of Upland Real Estate Group, which he founded in 1995. Under his leadership, Upland has been consistently recognized as one of the top commercial real estate brokerage firms by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. Keith has been recognized as one of the top brokers in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, and recently has been inducted in the Midwest Commercial Real Estate Hall of Fame. Keith Sturm, okay. Did I leave you out, Keith?
No, you just included me.
Okay, Keith Sturm. How do we get a hold of you?
My email is keith@upland, upland.com. You can reach me at our website, which is www.upland.com, or my phone number, 612-376-4488. Thanks, Howard.
You're welcome. I know what happened. I got the Keiths confused. That can happen. Did I introduce you, Tricia and Beth? I didn't. I'm sorry, Tricia, since you're over to my left, why don't you introduce yourself, Tricia, please, and unmute yourself.
People on the call know me. I'm the executive director for Retail Brokers Network, and I am here with any questions you have, or I will be distributing this after Howard gets it back to us. So I can be reached at tricialaw@retailbrokersnetwork.com.
My apologies, Tricia.
No, that's fine.
I should have done that. Okay, so now we're going to start with the content of the webinar, and I am going to hand this off to Beth, who will start asking the questions. Beth? Take it away.
Okay, thank you. And thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you guys who are participating as panelists. I really do appreciate it. The first question is pretty generic, I guess. How will the pandemic affect the future of all retail negotiations? And we're going to start with Keith Lord and then head to Tom and others if they'd like to participate. But we're talking about right now in the short term. So Keith, what do you think in the short term, how the pandemic's gonna affect the retail negotiations?
Well, it certainly will, because it adds a variable of risk for both landlords and tenants that we really haven't had or thought of before. And that now is at the forefront of everybody's mind. So as a landlord, you have to figure out a way to change your documents, your LOIs, and your negotiations to reflect and try to diminish this new risk. And the risk is the virus itself, and it can cause delays. It can cause issues with construction. It can cause issues with lawyers being around and available for lease negotiations, for getting quotes on TI, for tenants to be able to get loans for TI and banks. So there's a fair amount of new tenant risk that didn't exist. And again, it's a mitigation that we're now putting into leases, new language and it cuts both ways for both tenants and landlords regarding both force majeure, casualty in their insurance policy, in pandemic or national stoppage of being able to do work or run your business, and adding that into, we haven't put in LOIs yet, although I think people are going to start doing it, but certainly is going into leases, and it's a dual-edged sword and a dual protection mechanism.
Okay,
Good point.
Yeah, those are all good points. Tom, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think, just to kind of go along with that, anybody who's in the middle of a development deal right now is being confronted with basically rewriting any existing, due diligence periods. Everybody's including COVID language right now because, right now nobody knows when the municipalities are going to get back together for approvals, for any, architects or anybody else that you need requirements to hit certain deadlines and due diligence. It's just a real problem. So everybody is seeing the COVID language right now, and what it's just doing is just adding a lot of uncertainty as to how we can go ahead and get these things finished up and closed in calendar year 2020. And then I guess on the back end of the I guess the short term, once we come out of this, there's going to be a tremendous amount of pent up demand. So we're going to go from not having the ability, not knowing what to do and having a lot of unemployment, to having retailers having a hard time staffing because there's going to be a big influx as soon as this thing is over.
Okay.
Which leads me to the next poll question, if I might, Beth, interject. The next poll question is, do you think that brick and mortar will continue to shrink? If so, how much in the next 12 months? This is a multiple choice question because Tom just mentioned that there's going to be pent up demand. And while there will be, I question how much of that. So you'll have, as an attendee, an opportunity to chime in on that. Well, the answer is yes. There are a few no's. I think that there's no question. I think without the pandemic, things were going to shrink. Most of the people in the next 12 months feel that brick and mortar will continue to shrink by 20%. And then there's those who say 10%. Then there's 8% who believe that it'll be 30% or more, and then 3% says it'll be 50% or more. Let me just ask the other panelists, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really believe that we are going to see a decrease in brick and mortar locations. I really fear for the restaurants out there currently that we believe that 20% or more restaurants may just never open based upon what's going on here, and really it's based upon how much more time we're going to have this shutdown. So we believe that it's going to be maybe 20, maybe 30% of the restaurants. As it relates to the other tenants, I think the weaker tenants will not reopen. Frankly, this may be a good excuse for them just to quit. And I think we'll see mounting bankruptcies also. We will see, but the strong will survive. And hopefully what comes out of here is a stronger, better base of retail overall.
Anyone else like to talk? Keith? Or are you raising your hand, Keith Lord, or
No,
are you
no,
just stretching?
Sorry.
Okay.
I agree, but boy, we're on a really aggressive campaign to try to keep tenants open, and we can talk about that later. But I agree with the other Keith, and I think there will be tenants. I talked to one, and I'll leave it nameless, but the national director of real estate for a Subway competitor, and they're taking an aggressive move to increase advertising and to really push their stores and their sandwiches, their national campaign all over TV. But they say that they are closing their weak stores. They're looking at this as a time to take their bottom 25% of stores that would have been closed anyway, and just as Keith stated, go ahead and close them, and then put all the resources back into the strong performers and grow the volume on those. And I think that's going to be a general attitude as we go forward for a number of the retailers.
Good point. Good point. Tom?
Yeah, and you know, like he said, there's a number of these restaurants that if this pandemic never happened, they were going to close the next 6 months. They're going to use this as that excuse. We already had a saturation in a lot of the segments in the restaurant division. So, and then we're also confronted with the fact that any one of us who are representing restaurants, we don't have places to put people, and most of our markets are pretty overdeveloped. This is going to create opportunity when we come out of this thing. But yeah, in the short term, there's no question there's going to be some closings. But those, again, people are going to go back to restaurants at some point. Those sales are going to translate back to the stronger operators.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Beth, let's let you take it away again. You're in charge.
Okay. We talked about short term, what we think it's going to be short term as far as how the pandemic's affecting these lease negotiations. What do you think for the long term? Keith, Lord, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, I don't think long-term looks significantly different from short-term on lease negotiations. I think those issues are here now. We're still getting deals done. We closed a lease this week, in the last 2 weeks. We're actually using the pandemic to try to push people to move faster through the LOI and lease negotiation process. For example, telling people, a tenant, this is a great time to bid your construction because it's probably 20% cheaper than it was 30 days ago. And telling the attorneys, no disrespect, Howard, stop over negotiating the leases, stop worrying about the small points. If the landlord has a tenant ready to sign a lease and move forward, get through that process quickly, because there are a lot of landlords that would kill to have this tenant if this landlord or landlord that you're trying to put your tenant into doesn't move fast enough. So there's the other, especially for restaurants, certainly in Chicago, by the time they get plans done, permits out of the city, that's a real wild card. Construction is started, under construction, built, certified for occupancy and open. We're 6 months to 9 months out. So anything that's happening today, it's not going to matter in 9 months. We all think at some point, certainly within 9 months or 10 months, this will be somewhat reset, not back to normal, but certainly reset. And this is a great time to sign a lease and move forward. So we're pushing this now.
I think those are great points. Those are great points. I didn't think about the construction aspect of it being less expensive and
available.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I would just go ahead and add that, everybody's going to be obviously adding language now to try to cover what we're just going through. And I think my fear is that above and beyond that, we're going to try to go ahead and, negotiate further past that and try to get in front of whatever the next thing is going to be. And I think it's going to slow down and hopefully not, but potentially overcomplicate lease negotiations going forward. Because again, there's greater risk, from the lenders, from the landlords. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen once we come out of this thing from reimbursements. And then again, if the government is putting over $2 trillion, back into reimbursements, how does that affect everybody?
Good point.
Yeah, there are two factors. One is I went back and looked at almost 40 years worth of leases, and frankly, the provisions are a little bit more vague and ambiguous than I would have liked them to be. We didn't really consider this situation. So I think that as attorneys, we're going to be looking to clean some of that up in as broad a fashion as possible. And also, I'd like to just point out, in terms of going forward, even with the existing leases, there are some issues coming up that landlords are facing with their lenders, particularly those who have CMBS lenders. there's many more restrictions in terms of what the landlords can do with a CMBS lender, and it becomes a little bit more complicated. But that's also for another separate discussion. I'm probably going to have a separate webinar specifically for that. Beth, or if anybody else has anything to say.
Well,
I think that
I would just like to add, this is a wonderful time to be a retail leasing broker. Think about how the landlords and both landlords and tenants need your assistance to be on top of what the changes are in the lease languages, to figure out what workouts will be. And also, renewals will be coming up over the next, renewals always happen of leases. So I think as a retail expert and part of our retail brokers network, this is going to be a wonderful time for us to share information and be on top of the curve related to how to deal with both sides of the equation here, landlords and tenants.
Absolutely.
that's good. A question that we have for you, Howard, is we want to know some of the specific lease clauses that will be changing because of this. Well, I know we've talked about some of them with, insurance provisions and eminent domain and some of the things that, maybe like you said, we haven't thought about, but now we'll need to be doing this.
Absolutely. Before I start getting into the specific lease clauses, if I may, I'd like to reiterate something. First, as to existing leases and those that you're planning on using in the future, you got to read these leases end to end, from beginning to end, and you need to understand them. This is just, it's not fun to sit down and read a lease from beginning to end. And I've been doing it for a long time. And I like to tell everybody, look, I'm human. If I'm reading a 60-page or 130-page lease, I fall asleep somewhere in the middle of it, or a third of the way through, or I end up reading something and then realize, what did I read over the last 10 pages? I got to go back and read it again. And I have a whole system that I've set up to take into consideration who I am and what I am. It's just a lot of work. I review every lease 3 times so that I can catch it all. And if there's ever a moment where I have that, what did I just read? I just went from page 10 to 20 and I have no recollection. I probably just zoned out. So I go back, and then if I still have trouble, I mark it so that I can go back to it. You have to identify any provision that you may not understand or that can be considered vague and ambiguous. And in this case, you've got to go back and go, what did they mean by that? If you have that moment, then you need to ask the question and have that clarified. This is so very important in any lease negotiations. Now, let's talk about some of the negotiation of terms that we usually didn't pay much attention to. Insurance provision. Does rent loss insurance include pandemic government forced closures? And what about landlord? Let me change the page. What about landlord or tenant choosing to close? Will be more defined in the future. So this is something that we talked about, the insurance provisions. Generally speaking, your property damage insurance requires physical damage. That's the standard. You could have negotiated something else. And so you need to have an expert, and I'm not the expert, to read your insurance, not your insurance provision, but your insurance policy. There's few things that I hate doing worse than reading an insurance policy. And there are insurance attorneys that I go to say, you spend your time reading it, you tell me what covers it and what doesn't. I imagine that sometime in the very near future, some insurance companies are going to figure out how to make more money and provide coverage for something like this pandemic or similar, and they'll be charging more in premiums, and then landlords are going to require this kind of coverage. Sharing the liability is a good way of doing that. And if that occurs, then you will see less emphasis on some of the other clauses like force majeure, et cetera. So you're going to see, I suspect, better insurance coverage for situations like this, and that'll be something good for both landlords and tenants. Why don't we talk a little bit about force majeure? And I've done a webinar and written an article. Most of the force majeure provisions that I've looked at need more clarity. They are not written really well enough. Some of them include an exclusion for the payment of rent. So if the government has ordered a shutdown and you can't be open, about 30% of my leases say that you don't have to perform, except you still need to perform the payment of rent, which becomes very problematic for tenants. It's like, well, if I'm not making any money, how do I continue to perform rent? There are some other options. There could be a little bit more detail in the force majeure provisions that may say, okay, maybe you don't have to pay base rent, but you're still going to have to pay CAM charges so that the landlord doesn't have as much money going out the door. And then there will be some provisions that we may contemplate putting in the force majeure so that if we do have an occasion where the clause does come into play, then you're going to have, it's going to say, well, okay, under those circumstances, we're only going to defer the rent. I'm not a big fan of that in that particular case, forcing the parties into some sort of preconceived formula doesn't really take into account what we haven't anticipated. And I think that we really have to leave that open and be flexible. Why don't I ask a poll question, what the next poll question is? Okay, here's a poll question from Keith, your partner. Should brokers add force majeure language to their LOIs or leave this to the attorneys to duke it out? I'm getting a little old to duke things out, but I can take the position. This is just a simple yes or no question. The results are a surprising amount of retail brokers, 38% say yes. The majority say 63%. I'm going to stop sharing results and I'm going to give you my opinion. Really, no, don't do it. In this particular case, I like having a good LOI that can guide the lawyers so that we don't start getting into business provisions. I like to have the clients and the brokers handle as much of the business stuff as possible. And but I don't think that the force majeure language, I think it's more of a legal thing. And I think you're just going to kill deals before they even start if you include it in the LOI. Since Keith Lord is he's unmuted. Keith Lord, why don't you chime in on this?
Yeah, Scott, it's Scott Fithian from our office. It's a great question.
Yeah.
My concern when I read it last night is that you're now going to take the LOIs out of the broker's hands and they're going to start immediately getting them to the attorneys. And if the attorneys start negotiating the LOIs and the legal clauses in the LOIs, it's going to slow them down. And quite frankly, you could have two attorneys spend 3 hours negotiating the definition of force majeure, how big, how long, what is qualified. As of right now, no one has declared this pandemic force majeure. And it's a very interesting situation. If you look at Target leases, they don't have the right to stop paying rent, even if it was. If you take a look at Starbucks leases, they do. And that's probably not universal across the country. But here are two major nationals that have two very separate paragraphs under force majeure and rent payment. So I would leave it to the attorneys.
Yeah, Beth, what are your thoughts?
I agree. There was a question that came in from Randy Kutwika. I apologize. It says, does anyone have specific language they're using for the COVID-19 for their LOIs? So I think that that is kind of answering that question for you, Randy, that I think most people feel as though they should not be putting that in there. And I agree that it would be something for the attorneys to do. The LOIs are getting so long in general anyway, where they're trying to negotiate so many things in the LOIs that I agree that that's just something that we should leave to the attorneys.
I'll go quick and just say, I certainly agree. I mean, there's, it's, everybody has their specialty, and our specialty is not negotiating or is not interpreting certain legal terms. So that's just one to stay away from.
Keith?
Yeah, I go both ways on this. I think that it's good to have a starting point and a letter of intent, and the attorneys can, once you get the basis, they can tweak it from there. But my opinion is I like to have some kind of basis so that we don't lose a transaction over some attorneys duking it out, if you will.
Yeah, here's my thought. I had mentioned that I don't think it should be contained in an LOI, but as an attorney, since I know it's going to be an issue and it should be an issue, I would start out. I always want to know what my client wants, whether I'm representing the landlord or tenant. So I get to ask a lot of questions ahead of time. And that would be a question that I would ask either the landlord or the tenant that I'm representing is, this is going to be an issue. Where do you want to go with it? I mean, what's your threshold and how far do you want me to go on this? Is it a deal breaker? Is it not a deal breaker? Give me some guidance so that I don't just do whatever I think is appropriate, because you shouldn't do that. Let me go on to eminent domain. And this is my co-host brought this to my attention. In two other webinars, I discussed this. Eminent domain and condemnation. Never in my farthest imagination did I think that some eminent domain would fall into play in a pandemic situation. And Peter Morris, who's been my co-host, had brought it to my attention. My immediate reaction is no. Eminent domain and condemnation, we're talking about a public use. What's the public use? He provided me a United States Supreme Court case that I then looked at, and then I researched further, and I looked into California law, and then realized that, particularly the way that these provisions, the eminent domain provisions are written, it could come into play. And the question is whether or not there is currently an exclusion for pandemic, or whether or not the lease provision requires a physical taking. I think that a lot of it, the first thing you have to look at is what the provision says. But my guess is in most cases, it doesn't require a physical taking. It just says if there's a taking by eminent domain, the case law that I've seen has used the term taking and public use in a very broad concept, so that if the government orders a shutdown whether partial, temporary, permanent, or otherwise, that is for the public health and safety, arguably there is a taking, and it's for the public use. So these clauses, depending upon how they're written, may very well come into play. This caught me totally off guard. And then the next thing that you would need to consider is if these clauses come into play, what is mostly contained in these clauses, who gets compensated. And most of these provisions are written in favor of the landlords to ensure that the landlords get first dibs on the compensation or the majority of the compensation. So those are things that you're going to have to think about. Why don't we go to the question of co-tenancy provisions? Tom, why don't you talk about how co-tenancy provisions may change?
Well, I think we were already in the bounds of seeing some changes in them anyway. And co-tenancy really fluctuates depending upon supply and demand. A lot of retailers go ahead and ask for, fairly onerous co-tenancy provisions, one for protection, but in a lot of cases, self-admittedly, just have bargaining chips for in the future. So again, with supply and demand, if there's going to be a lot more space that's going to need to be filled, then I think we're going to see that, the landlords may be more generous in giving co-tenancy. Now, on the other hand, we're also coming out of the other side and we're seeing a lot of disastrous results from co-tenancy, and the fact that we've lost a lot of large boxes in malls and other power centers. And because of that, I mean, there's a number of large landlords that are, hanging by a thread at this point, not only because they've lost all that income, but because so many other co-tenancy provisions have kicked in. So I think, it's, no one has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen coming up, but, I think a lot of it's just going to depend upon, how much power the retailers are going to have and what landlords are going to have to do to try to make deals.
Absolutely.
Howard, can I weigh in on that just a second?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things that landlords can do right now with a defaulting or a tenant threatening to default. And we have a standard list that we go over with them. One of them is you have to waive your site restrictions, your visual restrictions, and your co-tenancies. If you want relief, so do I. And so here's a list of 10 different things that we're going to require before we talk about what sort of lease modifications you want to make in the short run. But one of them is get rid of the restrictions that tenants have over the land and landlord.
Flexibility. Everybody. I think someone else mentioned landlords do not want to get rid of good tenants. So landlords really, in my opinion, need to be as flexible as possible. Let me give you while my wife is not a landlord or a tenant, she has she's an executive recruiter, and her business has gone from 60 to 0 in 5 seconds flat. And then there's some outstanding accounts payable. And some have been paid, some of them haven't been paid. Some people haven't communicated, and some people have communicated. Some people said, we're in the process of getting an SBA loan. Well, that money's not going to come in anytime soon, to be perfectly frank. So, one of the things I told my wife is, look, we're all in this together. Let's not get angry at anybody who isn't paying. She knows these clients, so she knows that people aren't trying to mess around with her and take advantage. So we just all have to work together, and that's landlords and tenants and brokers and all of that. So anybody else have? I'd like to take 2 or 3 questions. If you don't mind, I'm going to move
I think
that.
Keith Sturm had something he wanted to add.
I'm sorry, Keith, go right ahead.
I'd just like to say from an investment sales point of view, we hate co-tenancy clauses. We always have, and we shouldn't make this another reason to add more co-tenancy clauses. And as far as I'm concerned, it depletes the value of every property when you add co-tenancy. So, I'd like to see it push the opposite direction to, try to eliminate these co-tenancy clauses as we negotiate with tenants going further. And maybe this is a reason to do that as a trade going forward. Just an idea to throw out there, because it does affect value.
Here's one question. Actually, the other questions that I see are we've actually answered. How does the panel see the effects on the crowded bar business model, given social distancing and potentially less seating capacity? Keith Sturm, why don't you start with that answer?
Well, I certainly like a good bar. The, it seems like most of our happy hours are via Zoom lately, and you know, they're kind of fun. But it would be good to you know, socialize more and get back to the way we have done it. And yeah, we certainly miss the interaction, and but I do think, you know, some of these Zoom happy hours may continue as one way of bringing people from throughout the country together, you know, from coast to coast. But yeah, hopefully we get back to that sooner than later.
Absolutely. Beth, you have any thoughts?
Well, I obviously see that the pandemic is affecting all of that. Everybody likes to be together and do things. I'm questioning whether or not when this all comes back, will people still have reservations about being together that closely and doing things and as a group? Or, you know, will you see people not shaking hands as much? Will you see people not hugging as much? Will you see people not, hey, do you want to share my drink? You want to taste this one? You know, I'm wondering if people will, you know, kind of change their habits for a while.
Yeah, Keith Lord, specifically, let's talk about the restaurant business. Are we going to see less seating in a restaurant? And, you know, how is that going to affect business?
It's affecting in a number of different ways. And again, if you look at what's happening coast to coast, some restaurants' volumes are up. Other restaurants, their volumes, the gross volume is down, but their profitability is up. And these are things that we're looking at as our good restaurateurs. I mean, if you were a restaurant, let's take Jimmy John's, for example, where 65% of the volume walks out the back door pre-pandemic, and you can close your front of the house and cut your overhead and expenses on the front and be almost a complete delivery, cutting your cost of operations, you may be in better shape now than you were 60, 90 days ago. The restaurants that are going to get hurt are the large, expensive, you know, Michelin 1-star, 2 stars, where you really need to be there. They can't deliver. They can't produce a product and have it go out the front door. But, you know, Portillo's is on fire right now across. I mean, there are lines 2-3 blocks long for the drive-through, and they're delivering like crazy, and they don't have their front of house expense. So I think you're going to see a couple things. Yes, there will be a shift in operations of all restaurant types, large, medium, and small, national and local. And I think Beth is right. It really depends upon how the pandemic finishes or where we are in 6 to 9 months. We're concerned, and we're starting to chart and talk to people in a number of industries. Again, I won't tell you which restaurant it was, but they're across from Wrigley Field, and they're looking at closing down completely. And I asked him why, and he goes, when are you going to go to Wrigley Field and watch the Cubs beat the Milwaukee team when sitting your 40,000 of your best friends when you could watch it on television with a small group? So, you know, it's concerts, it's venues, it's any large gathering of any type. And that rolls over, as somebody brought up before the call, to sports clubs. You know, why do I want to pick up a barbell that 25 people touch that day that I don't know where they were or their background? So I think it's not just bars and restaurants. It's any large group gathering of people like ICSC. But restaurants may, because they're smaller, have the ability to turn a lot easier than a large hotel.
Yeah, Tom? I'm sorry. Tom, go ahead.
It is a good point. I mean, I think all of us have been, you know, just been alerted to the fact as to, you know, how easily germs, everything can spread because it's been magnified to such an extent. That being said, we're social creatures, and I guess I didn't realize how often I'm in restaurants, and I guess maybe unfortunately in bars for that matter. But I'd kill to be in a bar or restaurant right now, and you know, and again, there's definitely going to be some fall. There's going to be some people, but I think over time, those fears are going to be alleviated. I thought Keith brought up a good point. I had a conversation with one of our fast fooders yesterday, and they're down 13%, and I was blown away by that, because you're right. At this point in time, they're running about half staff, and you know, they're far more profitable than they were 3 months ago. So you know, it's definitely it's you know, whether we go through a recession or when we went through 9/11, it always seems to be, the more attractive price points, the fast fooders, and the less expensive casual theme guys that have always been able to succeed and come out of this thing stronger. So I think we're going to see that.
Yeah, my thoughts are the bad restaurants aren't going to come back. Some are going to struggle, but overall, I think people are going to, when we start feeling safe, people will start coming back to restaurants. It's not so much restaurants that I think is problematic. Keith Lord had mentioned large public gatherings. I think restaurants do not have to be a large public gathering in order to be successful. But in conventions, sports venues, that's going to come back slower. I think a lot of people are going to be a little bit reluctant to walk into a stadium rubbing shoulders with everybody else, or going to Recon or something like that. That's going to have a little bit more of a staying effect and is going to be problematic. And any of those businesses that rely on those large public gatherings. I also see problems for malls or any of the retail businesses that have shifted their focus over the last 10 years to the experiential model. The experiential model is trying to distinguish yourself from online sales and bring people to the stores. So to the extent that a mall may be reliant upon that model, it may be a problem. On the other hand, grocery anchored shopping centers I see will recover pretty quickly because people are still going to grocery stores and dry cleaners and things like that. Large malls may be a bit of an issue. So let me go, if I might, to our final poll question, which is, how long do you think it will be before commercial real estate gets back to where it was in January 2020? Before this has all affected us. Now I'm launching the poll and let's see what everybody says. Some of the choices are 3 months or less, 6 months, 12 to 18 months, or 18 months or more. And so I've heard a lot of people saying, well, we're going to be back to normal in 3 months or 6 months. We're certainly, I think, in 3 to 6 months start coming back to normal. But I think that this is going to stick around with us for a while. Okay, we have a lot of people in the audience who are realists. That's my opinion. 3 months or less is just 3%. 6 months, 21%. 12 to 18 months, 55%. And 18 months or more. I'm kind of in the final two categories myself. Anybody else? Tom, Keith, Beth, you want to chime in?
And I was going to say 12 to 18 months. I'd take credit for it prior to the poll coming out, but that is really what I thought. I mean, I'm bullish upon what's going to happen when everybody comes back, but I think it's going to recover relatively quickly. And candidly, from considering what we've been through, if this thing can recover in 12 to 18 months, I think that's a pretty fast recovery.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Tom's dead on, but it's not going to come back to what it was January 1st. It's going to be different. I mean, there are going to be some titanic shifts in shopping patterns in the next 18 months and shift in how retailers do business. And there may be new categories of retailers that come out, like GoPuff is going across the country. You can't walk in. It's a 7-Eleven that delivers, period. And you might find 7-Eleven delivering, or the dollar stores delivering. So it's going to come back, but it's going to come back and look different.
Yeah, Keith, we are wondering in general what your thoughts are on how this is going to affect investment sales overall.
Well, first of all, I'd like to bring you back to Minneapolis 1 year and 1 day ago when the men's Final Four basketball championship games were in Minneapolis. and they were held right outside my office here in the financial district of downtown Minneapolis, which is where I'm at right now. We are considered an essential business. Real estate is considered, and real estate services is an essential business. And, you know, how much would we love to go back to watching the men's Final Four and the brackets and the championship game that we did just 1 year and 1 day ago. For you real basketball fans out there, college basketball fans, the score was Auburn 62 and Virginia 63. They went into overtime. It was a wonderful game to be at. So to answer your question with regard to investment sales and how the coronavirus will affect it, frankly, it already has. We have seen 70 to 80% of the transactions throughout the United States for investment sales pretty much disappear, that have been purchase agreements that have been canceled or delayed. And it's my feeling that most of these purchase agreements will not be resurrected once the virus is over. So we will be really starting from a different place. As we know, investment sales do very well when markets are stable and predictable. Stability and predictability is really a mainstay for investment sales, and today we have neither. So many investors that were not in 1031 exchanges are taking a wait and see approach, and they're conserving cash. Some of our investors believe that bargains will be found at prices that they can't resist. So they've been holding on to that cash and waiting again to see what happens. And they're ready to deploy that cash, I would say, once the markets become stable and predictable again. What we are seeing with the active investors currently is a flight to quality. And really, those are investors that have 1031s because their timing is still ticking and they are still investing in properties. We are also seeing a number of quality properties that we were not able to get a lot of activity on actually go under contract. And that includes dollar stores in rural locations throughout the United States, and also post offices that we've been selling. So again, very stable, predictable properties that have very low risk. And I'll give you an example of some other high quality investment grade tenants that are still active that we're still seeing and putting purchase agreements out on. The medical field is still active. Fresenius and DaVita are a couple tenants in that field. The dollar stores are very active now. In fact, we've reduced our cap rates on dollar stores, including Dollar General, Dollar Tree, and Family Dollar. 7-Elevens in the convenience market are very hot, and we are seeing multiple offers, and we're competing with folks for those types of properties. Pharmacies, the Walgreens and CVSs seem to have activity again. They're an essential business, and they seem to be doing well during the pandemic. Banks are still seeing activity. Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, US Bank. Grocery stores that are open and active are also seeing activity. Do-it-yourself stores are also seeing activity. The Home Depots, the Lowe's, and we have for the Midwest folks out there, and I know this is a Midwest call, so we are selling a Fleet Farm in Geneva, Wisconsin, and it's a $36 million property, and we are seeing activity on that property. Now, one of the things people would ask is, well, how are we going to finance in this market? And the sellers will finance that. So we'll have seller financing on that property. So sellers are being creative as far as in this market also, and that's a very interesting, I think, change. Other things that are selling, McDonald's, Starbucks, and Chick-fil-A, and we're seeing cap rates as low as 3.25% on these properties, and the ground leases that, so these are ground leases. And if you think about it, the T-bond, the 10-year T-bond, I think is at 6 or 0.6 of a percent. Maybe it's up a little bit today. But even at a 3.25% cap rate on a McDonald's, you know, that's a very significant uplift in your return for a very, very riskless, I would say, tenant. So these are investment grade tenants. What's not selling? This is not going to be surprising anybody, but most things are not selling are things that have been shut down. And things such as we say, the 3 F words, the fun, the fitness, and food, right? These were the tenants that most of our retail brokers out there were you know, really paying our rent, right? Paying our mortgage, because these were the tenants that were expanding. And now these are the first tenants that have been shut down because they are the experiential type of tenants, and really, it's going to be interesting to see what happens post-virus here. Other things that aren't selling are the non-corporate credits, the franchise credits, or I should say the franchisee credits are not selling because that will be the weaker and more risky types of tenants. And I think, they may be where the opportunities lie as we get out of this pandemic, as things stabilize and get more predictable. I think this is where people will find bargains and opportunities as they take on more risk. So really to sum up my part of it here is until we find a vaccine and things become more stable and predictable, we are going to expect a very major decrease in transaction volume and as we go forward, a slow recovery.
Okay, Beth, so you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate your sharing all of that, Keith. It was great to hear different tenants and categories and so forth as well. I think that the next part that we'd like to discuss is, again, how this is affecting overall how tenants are going to be handling all this.
I think it's going to be interesting as to, what happens, because certainly no one is going to recover from, 2020 from a sales standpoint. However, it's all going to be accounting. And, I know somebody had put up, one of the comments that you think it's fair that some of these retailers are double dipping because, certainly, there certainly have been retailers that have the ability to pay that have just categorically across the country refused to pay just because, it's just for whatever reason, it is the thing to do. And then they're also going to be going through the CARES program and going to be getting reimbursement. So, how are tenants going to survive? I mean, they're going to have to be creative. They're going to be, take advantage of what's out there. And, and those that, are strong enough, they're going to have to be opportunistic because there's going to be opportunity when this thing is over.
Okay, thank you.
Beth, do you want to talk about what landlords might be doing to protect themselves? I think you wanted Keith Lord to start in with that.
Yeah, I think Keith can handle that well.
We've been fortunate to surround ourselves with people much smarter than we are and compile the things that people are doing and landlords and kind of create a list. I mean, the thing that just amazes me, and I had a long discussion with a head of real estate for Mangiano's and Corner Bakery, a guy out of Dallas who I've known for a long time. And, we got their standard Corner Bakery letter dated March 22nd. And I called him and we had about an hour chat. It was very open. And that was a form letter, as many of us have seen a ton of. Tricia actually has a DocuSign or a file where you can retrieve the national letters from Subway and Panda and Corner and many other retailers. But I asked the guy, I said, I'm really a little offended that you're coming at me on March 22nd when the CARES Act hadn't even gone out, and the CARES Act was 3 days following. And the first thing as a landlord that we're doing when a tenant comes to us is referring back to an infamous movie, sorry for the younger people on the call, called The Poseidon Adventure, where there were really a boat flipped over, if you don't know it, and a small group self-helped themselves and lived, and the group that stayed back and didn't self-help themselves died. And that's kind of where we start very dramatically talking to retailers. Is the first question we're asking as a landlord is, what are you doing to help yourself? Did you apply for the PPP? And if you did, send me documentation that you did, because you get an email back when you apply. That PPP can be used to pay rent. So can the EIDL. So we want to know state by state, what is the tenant doing to help themselves before they get into a discussion with a landlord. The next thing we're doing is analyzing our leases with the tenant. Do they have, as Howard mentioned, what is the casualty provision, the force majeure? Do they have the right to withhold rent? Most of them don't, because these provisions weren't in the lease. But we also want to know what their insurance policies state. So we're asking for copies of their insurance policies because in some leases, we're a named insured. Check your leases, because if you are, and that insurance policy for the tenant kicks in, you have a claim to your rent on that policy. So we want to take a look at their leases. We're looking at their guarantors. Can their guarantors survive this? Do we need to try to augment a guarantor? Again, we talked about their lease policies. You want to take a look at your leases regarding force majeure, and Howard, as you stated. We are also asking each tenant for a trailing 18 months P&O. I want to know what their balance sheet is for the last 18 months, month by month, because as Tom just mentioned, some of these tenants may be double dipping. They may be getting a concession. And just remember, this is a very hard topic or concept for many of us. Rent for a restaurant and a bar should be no more than 10% of their gross income. They tend to range from 7% to about 12%. But if it's 10% in the state of Illinois, we've waived our 10.5% of sales tax, federal, state, and local. So they can sell products, save 10.5%. So why don't you give me the 10% of your gross income of rent you owe me? So we're coming at it kind and nice, fair with integrity, but it's not, it's tough. I mean, we're going after tenants, asking for information, asking for financials and the guarantors. Might be time to update the financials. They don't want to do that. They might pay their rent instead. And we found when we start really digging into these tenants, and these are the big ones all the way on down to the franchisees, they take a real hard swallow about making us the place to go to for a loan. So they're paying rent, and any concessions that we're giving, I think it was another RBN office in Phoenix said, do it in small amounts. Don't give a year's abatement. Don't give 6 months. Do it on a month-to-month rolling basis, because as Tom said, this may be over in 60, 90, 120 days, or over enough that they can pay rent. So as a landlord, to protect ourselves, we want as much information as we can get out of the tenant. We want to reanalyze them as a risk profile, and then make a decision if you want to provide some sort of rent assessment or rent abatement. But we're not giving much of that to the large public companies. If they weren't saving up on their own world for something like this, shame on them. But I think landlords need to take this time. It's an opportunity to better your lease, to better your guarantees. And if you make concessions, make them short, and make sure that you are making them with full information on the financials of the tenant, and that the tenant is helping themselves first.
Okay. Great points, Keith. Let me add something. You point out something that in an earlier webinar, I made a point to tenants. Anticipate what a good landlord should want. So don't just go, I'm not paying rent, or don't just go, I'd like an abatement or forgiveness. Think ahead. What would I do if I were a landlord? I'm going to want financials, all the things that you're pointing out. And it would be nice to present a package and a plan right up front. You will streamline the process, and I've got to imagine the landlords would appreciate that. And it means that you have a professional tenant, and that's the kind of tenant that you want to have there. Any other
Great
points?
I think those are great. I mean, but again, the macro is, and Tom mentioned there are a lot of ways that tenants can help themselves. I mean, they can expand their delivery area. They can repurpose their front of the house people, which we have seen in Chicago, as delivery people. In that possibility, they're taking them, instead of busing a table and laying them off and having them apply for unemployment insurance, if they file for the PPP, they can still pay them. And you can say, okay, I don't want to pay the 20% to Grubhub and Uber Eats and DoorDash. You're our new delivery people. So get in your car, we'll pay for gas. So now the landlord or the tenant saves 20% of delivery cost and keeps their people in line. So the tenants have to be creative. They have to expand their market zones. They have to use social media in a much better way. They have to kind of break and try to look at bending some of the rules that have been put on them. We've had a lot of bars that have gone to the villages and cities and say, I want to sell packaged goods out the front door. And I want to be able to deliver. Olive Garden did this. You can now get wine delivered if you order from Olive Garden. They'll do a door delivery. They didn't used to be able to do that. Bars can get a 6-month package right to sell alcohol. Alcohol's up 500% across the country. So if a bar can, instead of have you go in, can have delivery orders picked up like Amazon and Whole Foods, they actually can make money. So the tenants have to think outside of the box, and they have to look at how they can get better exposure and market themselves if they feel that they can make money on the delivery and pickup business. And a lot are.
Yeah, I'd like to add, if I were a landlord, I'd also want to know whether or not the tenant is receiving assistance from the CARES Act or in any other
Yep.
form. I mean,
Yep.
these are conversations that we've had, and I said, look, if I'm a landlord, why am I going to give you a break on rent if you're getting all of this money? I mean, because the landlord's got to pay its mortgage. So these are things that people really need to pay attention to. And again, I think that the tenants should in advance be open and upfront and say, well, instead of me asking for $100,000 worth of rent relief, maybe all I really need is 50,000 or 20,000 or whatever.
Yeah, and again, the PPP and the EIDL loans and many of the individual state loans, Chicago, we have a Chicago Disaster Resiliency Fund. Not a lot, it's $50,000 per applicant, but that's a fair amount of rent. And all of those loan packages can be used to pay rent, or parts of them. On PPL, 25% of the money that they get can be used to pay rent and utilities. So there are a lot of vehicles for these tenants to self-help. We want to know that they're using them. We want to know that they're marketing themselves differently. And we want proof, as you just said, Howard. You can get proof from the tenant that they have applied for these loans. Every time you apply for one, you get an email that says your application is in process or in the queue. We just want to see them.
Absolutely. So why don't we get to Trish and Beth? Have you seen any questions in the chat that you think that we should answer?
Yeah, there are a few here. I'm going to read this one from Geraldo. This is follow-up question to Keith Lord. Great response on landlords' ways to protect themselves from tenants' requests to rent reduction and waiver. What about protecting from lenders' requirements? You were kind of touching a little bit on that.
Well, this is a big one, and I'm going to have Keith, the other Keith, is probably more knowledgeable to answer this. We're talking to our lenders, but we're not talking about tenants defaulting, and we're not talking about problems. We're opening communications, because if you have a loan with a lender and you let on that you may have a problem, you just marked yourself. You just put yourself into a potential default or a different class of loan. I talked to the regional heads of Wintrust, which is a big banking in the Midwest. And they said they have 5, they're now taking all loans and marking them into one of 5 categories. 5 is outstanding, the guarantor is good, it's a performing loan, all the way on down to ones that are going to start moving on, which is a class 1 loan. He said, be real careful of calling your lender up and positioning your building as in mediocre, poor position, because then you're going to get classed as a loan. And don't forget, they can do cash calls on landlords too. So, and they can do the same thing and try to increase their guarantees. So they're in a self-preservation mode. They can't make money lending unless it's through one of the programs, because you've got, unless they put the 4% floors, which we're seeing a lot of. But the lenders, dealing with your lenders, be careful. Open communication so you know who to talk to. But unless you have a problem and you want an immediate response, I'm not sure I would go and start attacking the lenders until you know your economic problem with your tenants first. Otherwise, I think we're jumping the gun. One exception, we have a broker that has residential loans with Wells Fargo. She called and went online. Wells Fargo said, just go online. You can get a 3 months abeyance just by doing it online. You don't even have to talk to anybody. So some of the I don't know that that's happening on commercial, but we know that's happening on residential. These are condo loans. And I think it's quite fascinating that somebody like Wells Fargo, that big, doesn't even want to talk to you. Just go do it online and ask for it, and we'll grant it. So there's the opposite side of that. I don't know many other lenders that are doing that. The rumor is Chase and Citi have a similar program, but it's mainly for small balance residential.
And I would add to that, if you have a loan that's due and you can pay it, pay it. It's not going to do you any good by not communicating with your lender and not paying your loan. So the first advice is, if you have a loan that's due and you can pay it, don't hold those funds and pay it. The other part of that is today's the 7th of April, and rent was due on the 1st. And at this point, we're going to be hitting the late fees on the 10th. So if you haven't heard from your tenants and they haven't paid your rent, now may be a good time to start a communication with them. In addition, I think we're all in this together, right? So if we're not getting rent from our tenants, we're going to have a tough time paying our loans to our lenders. So to Keith Lord's point, you know, communication with your lender at this point is probably a very good idea to talk about, hey, this tenant didn't pay, this tenant didn't pay. What can we do to modify our loan? If we need to, what kind of help are you willing to do? I had the same conversation with one of my lenders, and they were able to go to interest only for 6 months. So they're going to allow us to do that. They want their, interest only, so they want their interest payment, but they're willing to forgo on the principal amount. So lots of ideas here, but make sure you're communicating with your lender, and just don't hold back that loan, because they will and can and may foreclose and be pretty nasty if they have to.
Yeah. Before you ask another question, there were two specific examples of what landlords are doing, and they're just the opposite of each other. One is Taubman. Taubman sent out a memo pretty much advising all of the tenants, pay up. Just, that's all, pay your rent. That's it. Understand that Taubman is in the process of being purchased by Simon. Other than the fact that they want money, their motivation may be that they want to retain their value with Simon rather than losing value. They want to make sure that the deal goes through. And also it may be posturing on their part. I've been involved with lots and lots of landlords or tenants who simply let the other side know, here's the hard line, but they know that they're going to be giving, and they hopefully, as many of them will just stick with the hard line. The other one is just the opposite. And Kimco, Connor Flynn, did a video and is having their representatives go to the tenants and help the tenants get relief from the CARES Act. So they are affirmatively helping their tenants. And I think that that's a brilliant move. They are helping themselves by helping their tenants. And whatever they can do to help out, I think that's just the way to go. First of all, that's the kind of landlord that I want to have. And two, it just helps everybody to do that. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was muted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got one that here from Chad Sturm. Is this a relation, Keith? A lot of talk about good retailers and restaurants. How is this going to affect the service retailers such as massage, hair, nails, etc.? Let me just throw in there hair. My wife's hair's beginning to turn gray. And so as soon as she can get back, she's going to go to have her hair done and her nails done. She tells me that she's never had her nails as short as they are right now. So I think that's going to be a pent up demand. But initially, I think that they're going to have to take certain precautions because they're really in close contact with people. Anyone else's thoughts on this? Beth should be the next one.
I'll go to the two of the leases that we are closing come from RBN. It's a Hotworks franchisees, which was an RBN referral. And if you guys don't have in your market, they have about 200. They're expanding across the country, but this is the tenant that you have your own private sauna and you go in and put a screen on with your private instructor and you can have a private workout in your 10 by 15 sauna. They're moving forward because they don't even have to be manned. They can be vacant. I mean, they run on automation and you're going to go, and instead of going to a sports club, you could go to this place and get your own private room and crank up the heat and do a workout by yourself with a video person. And by the way, that's still legal to go to. If it's a medical, if it's a Hot Works medical spa, all you gotta do is attach the word medical spa onto anything right now, and you fall into, in the state of Illinois, medical use. So if you are Elements Massage and Medical Spa, you can be open. If you are, just think of all of the different tenants that can use that, the salon tenants that can use that if they are tanning, doing medical massage. Yeah, is it a stretch? Yes, it is. Is it perfectly legal? Probably not. But a lot of these tenants, again, are calling their alderman in Chicago and say, hey, this is what I'm doing to stay open and employ people. And these spa salon businesses, your wife going and getting her hair done, yeah, probably not essential. But if you can spin it as a medical or a spa, or I think you have a greater chance of coming back. And people are going to be dying to do that, especially if they're in separate rooms.
Right. Beth, any more questions?
Yeah.
So unless we have any other questions, we're getting close to the 1.5 hour mark, and I recommend that we start wrapping this up.
Okay, I think that's great.
Yeah. So if I might, let me tell people, for anyone who's on this, I'm going to send an email as to my past webinars. I have some upcoming webinars, one on April 16th, which is on bankruptcies. I hate to talk about it, but it's something that we're going to have to be thinking about. I'm going to have a couple of bankruptcy specialists, one from Canada, 2 from California, and 1 from South Carolina, who's going to be talking about both Canadian and U.S. bankruptcies and how they affect landlords and tenants. I'm also going to have on the 18th of April a webinar in which we're going to be talking about the CARES Act. I'm going to have a couple of people on, hopefully someone from the SBA, who's going to talk about the process, what you can get. And then, of course, I'm going to be doing some of my own research. And this is going to be how it'll help employees, landlords, and tenants. That's really what we're going to focus on. And frankly, I'm going to focus quite a bit myself on landlords, because a lot of what you hear publicly is employees and tenants and businesses, and I don't see a lot of mention in terms of landlords. And we got to make sure that landlords survive. Everybody's got to share the pain. Now I'd like to thank each and every one of our panelists, and then ask everyone to, and I'll go one by one. So turn your sound on, unmute yourself. I'm going to remind everybody, or ask you to remind everybody how to get a hold of you. Starting from my bottom right, Keith Lord, how do people get a hold of you?
The best way to reach us is, or me, is keith@lordcompanies.com. You can also text me at 312-287-6066. It's my cell phone. Our office is still at 100% in working. We're every broker plowing full speed ahead, just not in the office. So I'm actually in Michigan, but taking over a dining room table as a desk, and we're still at work. We're talking to a lot of villages, a lot of cities, a lot of landlords, including our tenants. We advise people, and just say this: if you haven't for your company, or your company hasn't applied for the PPP, it's time now, today, tomorrow, before those funds go away. And the EDLs, but file one of those too. Even if you don't want to use it, you can always cancel it. That one has some personal guarantees on it, but at the same time, it's a lot easier to advise tenants to apply for these loans if you've done it. And you can, Howard, help tenants through that process. We have a daycare center in Chicago, and we found one of our financial advisors has now started a side business of helping tenants and businesses apply for the CARE Act loans for a fee, but they're making money doing it. But you know what? It's still a way to help people move forward. That's all positive.
Excellent. Do you have something else coming up that you want people to tell? Any webinars or anything that you've got scheduled?
we're listening to probably 2 or 3 a day and getting information. We're not in a position yet to give them because I don't want to put a lot of the stuff that we're telling landlords in writing. Would rather talk to them, because I am worried that all of a sudden there was an instance in Chicago where there was an alderman and a number of developers on the south side. Luckily, I missed it, but somebody got a hold of it and printed it, and it had the developers' names and the landlords' names and what each one said on the webinar. So we have to be a little bit careful of that and putting that in writing. So we're here if people want to call us and talk to us.
Keith Sturm, how do people get a hold of you?
You can reach me at Keith, Keith, at upland, upland.com, or my direct number is 612-376-4488, and also at our website at upland.com. Would you like final comments at this point too?
Sure.
So anyways, I've been through this 2 or 3 times, not this specific thing, but with a crash in the market. And my message really to the younger agents out there is hang in there, guys. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll get through this, right? We're all going to get through this. And maybe if we get through the tunnel here and see the light, it's even going to be better for you and in your business. And really, our clients need our help in these times. And we've been busy fielding calls from our clients, helping them through this with questions. And frankly, they do need your help, and they do need your experience and expertise. And, really, my final comment is God bless everybody, and stay healthy as we get through this pandemic.
Thank you. Tom.
First of all, I want to thank everybody here on the panel, Keith and Keith, for participating in this. Appreciate that. Beth, thanks so much for putting this together. Trish, everything that you always do for the organization, thank you for that. And of course, Howard, thanks for taking the time to do this with us. Certainly do appreciate it. You can reach me at tbrust@founders3.com, or you can call me on my cell, as we all are still remote, 414-688-8820. And again, I appreciate Keith Sturm's comments on that, because we certainly have a lot of folks who have not been through things like this before, but there's no question, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're all gonna come out of this thing just fine, and hopefully stronger on the other side. So thanks again.
Thank you. Beth.
Thanks everyone for participating. I really do appreciate it. I think it's been very, very informative, and I love the fact that we had different areas to focus on, and it's been so helpful, for myself as well as for everyone. You can reach me at beth.patterson@rcre.com, and that stands for Resource Commercial Real Estate out of Indianapolis. You can also reach any of us, and I think Trish will share a map with you and give that to Howard, and Howard could have it out there as well as Trish. But we do have over, I think it's 58 different offices throughout the country. So if anyone needs brokers, needs help in any of the states within where our offices are located, we'd be really happy to help anybody. And so she can send the map over to show you where the RBN offices are, and it will give specifics on the brokers there and kind of who does what. And so we're always willing to, look at new clients and help out there. In addition, we have some, I'll say, holes in the United States of some places where we'd like to increase our membership of RBN. So there may be some folks out there who would like to become a part of RBN, and if they're an independent brokerage firm, that might be a good way to kind of reach out to us, and we could see if maybe there's a connection there. So
Right.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Beth. And Trish, my sister-in-law is Trish. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, I'm going to be posting this information, and we've also, like Keith Lord said, I have a folder that's online that has documentation that other brokers within RBN have sent to me with regards to the COVID-19 issues. So I will send that link out to the network as well. And if you ever need anything, please reach out to me. I'm working every day, so I'm here for you guys. So tricialaw@retailbrokers.com, or you can call me 425-241-4261.
And thank you, Tricia. And I'm Howard Klein, or Howard F. Klein, Esquire. I'm an attorney. I'm available for consultation or representation. And you can get a hold of me at Howard@H as in Howard, F as in Frederick, K as in Klein, L as in Larry, A as in Albert, W as in William.com, or you can call me at 949-954-6699. I'd like to thank every one of the panelists. You guys were great. And I would encourage anybody who is watching this either now or in the recording, certainly I would encourage you to contact any one of the panelists or anyone else at RBN who is very experienced in retail real estate. And with that, I also like to thank the audience. Thank you very much for having me do this for you. I really, really appreciate it. So with that being said, I'd like to, unless someone else has something else to say, I'm going to be the technician here and close the webinar.
Thank you very much, Howard. Really
That's it.
appreciate it.
That's a wrap.
Thanks, Howard.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Trish.